"We need a mother," said the cowboys' daughters. Then they chose an Apache woman in chains. It always did at this time of year. Jace Harrow could feel it in his bones. The wind howled through the empty plains, pushing the dirt like a blanket across the ground. His daughters, Sarah and Emma, sat close to the fire, their faces glowing in the flickering light. They were always so quiet at night, but tonight there was something different about them. They looked lost, like they were thinking about something they didn't want to say. Jace knew what it was. He was a cowboy. He had lived a rough life, and he was used to handling things alone. But ever since his wife passed away, he had struggled. It had been 2 years, but the hole in his heart was still there. He did the best he could for his daughters, teaching them to ride horses, fix fences, and handle a rifle. But there were things a father couldn't give that a mother could. That night, as the fire crackled, Jace could see the sadness in Sarah's eyes. She was the oldest, at 14, but she had taken on the role of the protector. Emma, at 12, was quieter, more thoughtful. She was still young enough to hope, to dream of things she had never known. "We need a mother," Sarah said quietly, breaking the silence that had settled over the camp. Jace stiffened, his heart sinking. He had heard the words before, but tonight they were different. Tonight they were real. Emma nodded, her voice soft. "I know. It's not the same." Not without her. His throat tightened. His wife, Rachel, had been everything to him. Everything to them. She had been the warmth in their home, the one who could always make things right, even in the toughest times. Without her, the ranch felt empty, and no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't fill the space she had left behind. "I'll figure something out," Jace said after a moment, his voice rough. "I'll find a way. I promise." But inside, he wasn't so sure. The truth was, he had been thinking about the same thing. He knew he couldn't keep going like this, trying to be both a father and a mother. The girls needed more than just him. They needed someone to teach them how to be women, someone who could show them the softness that Rachel had once given them. But where would he find someone like that? And how could he trust anyone to take Rachel's place? The wind howled louder, as if answering his doubts. It was a sound Jace had learned to ignore over the years. But tonight, it felt different, like the storm was going to take something from him. The darkness outside seemed to grow heavier, like it was pressing in on them. The next morning, Jace woke to the sound of his daughters whispering to each other outside their small cabin. The sun had barely risen, and the air was thick with the heat of the summer. He grabbed his hat and stepped outside, shielding his eyes from the sun's early rays. Sarah and Emma were standing by the fence, staring at something in the distance. "Pa," Sarah said, turning to him, her voice urgent. "You've got to come look at this." Jace walked over to where she was pointing, his boots kicking up dust with every step. At first, he saw nothing but the endless stretch of the plains, the dry earth cracked and barren. But then, on the horizon, he saw it, a plume of smoke rising from behind the hills. "What is it?" Emma asked, her voice full of concern. Jace's eyes narrowed. It didn't look like a natural fire. No, this was something different. He'd seen enough to know that smoke like that came from something big, something dangerous. "It's a ship," Jace said, his voice low. "A wreck." The girls looked at each other, their faces filled with curiosity and fear. Jace could feel the tension in the air as he made the decision to investigate. They couldn't leave something like that lying around on their land. It was too close, too strange. And if it was a ship, there could be survivors. They couldn't risk leaving someone out there in the desert without help. "Get the horses," Jace ordered. "We're going to check it out." It didn't take long for them to reach the wreckage. As they got closer, Jace could see the twisted remains of a spaceship half buried in the dirt. The hull was blackened, charred from the crash. There was no sign of life, no movement. But as they approached, a faint sound reached his ears, a soft, pained groan. "Someone's alive," Jace muttered under his breath, pulling the reins on his horse. He led the way, his daughters following closely behind. The wreck was a mess of twisted metal, but in the center there was a figure lying on the ground, barely conscious. Jace dismounted, his boots thudding against the dirt as he hurried over. It was a woman. Her face was dirty, her clothes torn and covered in dust. But even in her state, she had an air of strength about her. She was bound in chains, her hands shackled to the wreckage, her legs bruised from the crash. Jace's heart skipped a beat. He didn't know who she was, but he could tell she had been through hell. "Pa, who is she?" Sarah asked, her voice full of awe and fear. Jace didn't answer. He knelt beside the woman, checking for injuries. She had a deep gash on her forehead, and her breathing was shallow, but she was alive. "We need to get her back to the cabin," Jace said, his voice firm. "Emma, get the wagon ready. Sarah, help me lift her." As they carefully lifted the woman into the wagon, Jace couldn't shake the feeling that their lives were about to change. He didn't know who this woman was or why she was here, but one thing was clear: she was no ordinary stranger. She was something else. And somehow, she was going to be a part of their lives. As the wagon rolled back toward the ranch, the wind howled again, the storm now raging in the distance. Jace couldn't help but wonder if the storm had brought them something more than just a woman in chains. Had it brought them the future they all needed? The sun was high when they finally returned to the ranch. Jace's hands were rough and steady as he drove the wagon, the wheels creaking with every turn. The strange woman in the back of the wagon was barely conscious, but she was still alive. Her breaths were shallow but steady. Sarah and Emma rode on horseback beside him, glancing over at the woman every now and then, their curiosity growing with each mile. "Do you think she's a runaway?" Emma asked, her voice soft, full of wonder. "I don't know, darling," Jace replied, his eyes focused on the road ahead. "But we're not leaving her out there." The wind had picked up again, swirling the dust in the air. It felt like a warning, a reminder that things weren't going to stay the same for long. Jace couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the edge of something they couldn't control. Once they reached the cabin, Jace helped Sarah and Emma carefully lift the woman from the wagon. She was light, but stiff, as if every muscle in her body had been tensed for too long. They laid her down on the old wooden bed in the cabin, and Jace immediately set to work, cleaning the wound on her forehead. "She needs food, water, and rest," Jace said, glancing up at his daughters. "But we can't waste time. We've got to figure out who she is, and why she's here. Do you think she'll wake up soon?" "I hope so," Jace replied, "but we'll have to be patient. We're in no shape to move her anywhere until she's stronger." Emma stood by the window, her eyes focused on the empty horizon. What if she's dangerous? Jace gave her a reassuring smile, though he felt a flicker of doubt in his chest. "We'll be careful, but she's not our enemy. I can feel that." The hours passed slowly. Jace checked the woman's condition every few minutes, while Sarah helped with the chores around the cabin. Emma stayed near the window, her gaze never straying too far from the woman on the bed. As the sun began to dip low in the sky, casting long shadows across the plains, Jace heard the soft rustling of movement behind him. He turned to find the woman's eyes fluttering open. For a moment she just stared at him, her eyes dark and distant, as if she were seeing a world far away. Then her gaze shifted to Sarah and Emma, who stood near the fire, watching with bated breath. "Where am I?" The woman's voice was weak, but steady. It was a sound Jace would never forget, a voice that seemed to carry the weight of something much older than her appearance. "You're at my ranch," Jace said gently. "We found you after your ship crashed. You've been through a lot. Just rest now." The woman's lips parted as if she were about to speak, but then she winced, her hand reaching for her head. Who are you?" she asked, her voice trembling. "My name's Jace Harrow," he replied, watching her carefully. "This is Sarah and Emma, my daughters." She nodded slowly, but there was something in her eyes, a flicker of recognition, or perhaps suspicion, that made Jace uneasy. She didn't speak for a long time, just staring at the ceiling as if searching for something. Finally, after a long silence, she spoke again. "Arya," she whispered. "My name is Arya." Jace nodded, understanding that she wasn't ready to share more. He wasn't going to push her. "You're safe here, Arya. We'll get you back on your feet." Arya's eyes flipped to Emma, then to Sarah. She seemed to hesitate before speaking again. "You don't know who I am, do you?" Her voice was soft, almost a murmur. Jace frowned. "No, I don't." Arya's eyes grew distant again, and for a moment Jace could see the pain she was trying to hide. She swallowed hard before speaking. "I wasn't always like this, bound and broken." She paused, her hand lightly touching the chains still around her wrists. "I was part of a tribe, a people who've been hunted, captured, and now forgotten." Sarah stepped forward, her voice hesitant. "You're Apache?" Arya's gaze sharpened, and she gave a slow, nodding affirmation. "Yes," she said, her voice like a quiet storm. "But not the Apache you know. I'm not just a warrior or a captive. I was a leader." Her voice trailed off, and she closed her eyes. Jace exchanged a glance with Sarah, who looked both intrigued and troubled. Emma's eyes widened, but she didn't speak. The air in the cabin seemed to grow heavier, as if Arya's words were drawing a weight they couldn't understand. "You led?" Sarah asked softly. But what happened? Arya opened her eyes slowly, and for the first time Jace saw a flicker of fire in them. The Zarkani happened, she said, her voice growing colder. They came to our world, destroyed our homes, captured our people. They wanted us as slaves, or worse. Jace's heart sank. He'd heard of the Zarkani, mercenaries, traitors, and conquerors from distant planets. They had a reputation for brutality, leaving nothing but death and destruction in their wake. But to hear it from Arya, to know she had lived through it. Why did they bring you here? Jace asked, his voice steady, though his mind was racing. Why did they keep you chained? Arya's gaze faltered, her eyes clouding with a pain that was too deep to describe. I was important to them, but I was also their prisoner. She looked down at her chains again, her hand tightening around them. I don't know why they left me behind. I was supposed to die with the others. Jace stepped closer, his voice soft but firm. We're not your enemies. You're safe here, Arya.
You don't have to be afraid.
She closed her eyes again, as if retreating into herself. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I don't know if I can trust anyone anymore. Jace felt a pang of sympathy for her. He could see that her past was heavy, too heavy for her to carry alone. But he knew one thing. The woman lying in front of him, broken and scarred, was not the enemy. She wasn't the threat. The real danger was still out there, lurking in the shadows. Jace took a deep breath and nodded. We'll take things slow, but we'll get through this together. And though Arya didn't respond, Jace knew that this was just the beginning. The storm outside was nothing compared to the storm inside Arya, and it would take time they didn't have, to heal the wounds she carried. But Jace was willing to wait. For her, and for his daughters. Because they needed her. And maybe, just maybe, she needed them too. Days passed slowly at the ranch, and the rhythm of life began to settle into a new routine. The storm outside had passed, leaving the plains in a quiet, dusty calm. But inside the cabin, the atmosphere was heavy, as if something was shifting, something that could not be stopped. Arya was recovering, though still fragile. She spent most of her time resting, but Jace could see that the weight of her past lingered in her eyes. She didn't speak much about her life before the crash, and Jace didn't push. He understood that healing wasn't something that could be rushed, yet there was a connection growing between them, a quiet understanding. The days spent together were forming a bond that neither of them had expected. Sarah and Emma, too, had begun to change. They watched over Arya with a care that was beyond their years, seeing her not just as a stranger, but as something more, a part of their family, even if they didn't fully understand it yet. They helped with the chores around the ranch, all the while asking questions about Arya's life, her people, and her journey. And though Arya didn't answer all of them, she did share stories about her people, about her tribe, about the strength of the Apache warriors, and about how she had fought to survive. I never thought I'd find a place like this again, Arya said one afternoon, sitting by the fire. Her voice was still hoarse from the crash, but the words held a certain strength, a place where I can breathe. You've been through more than any of us can imagine, he said quietly. But you're not alone anymore. She was looking into the fire, her face lit by the dancing flames. For a moment, Jace thought she might say something more, but instead she just nodded, her hand unconsciously touching the chains still around her wrists. I want to help, Arya said after a long pause. I can't just sit here and be taken care of. I've been a fighter my whole life. I know how to survive. I'll help you. Jace raised an eyebrow. How? Arya looked up, her eyes intense. I know how to track, how to hunt, how to fight. The Zarkani won't just let me go. They'll come for me, for all of us. But we can prepare. We can fight back. Jace felt a stir of uncertainty in his chest. He had no experience with the kind of war Arya was speaking of. He was a rancher, not a soldier. But there was something about her, something fierce in her voice that made him reconsider. Arya had lived through things he couldn't even imagine, and if she said the danger was real, he believed her. What do you need from me? He asked. Arya hesitated, then nodded toward the guns hanging on the wall. I need weapons. I need to be ready. He wasn't sure about the idea of training Arya to fight, especially with his daughter so close by, but something in her gaze told him she was serious. She had seen things that had broken her, but they hadn't broken her spirit. You don't have to do this alone, Jace said softly, but his voice firm. We'll help you. I'm not alone anymore, she said quietly, almost to herself. She turned to face Jace fully, her eyes unwavering. But I will fight for you. For your family. Jace looked at her for a moment, feeling a sudden weight in his chest. It wasn't just her fight anymore. It was theirs, too. He couldn't deny the truth in her words. The Zarkani were coming, and they would stop at nothing to get what they wanted. But Jace wasn't going to sit by and let them take his family. Not without a fight. The next few days were filled with preparations. Jace showed Arya how to use the ranch's tools and weapons. He taught her how to ride a horse, and they worked together on strengthening the defenses around the ranch. Sarah and Emma helped, too, learning alongside Arya. Though they were still young, there was no question that they would need to be strong, stronger than they had ever been before. By the end of the week, they had built a barricade around the perimeter of the ranch. The house was fortified, and the horses were moved to a safer area away from the main building. Arya had taught them how to set traps, how to track, and how to stay silent in the face of danger. One evening, as the sun dipped low in the sky, casting long shadows across the plains, Jace sat outside on the porch watching the horizon. He had never been one to sit still for long, but today, everything felt different. The air was thick with anticipation, like the calm before a storm. Arya came up behind him, her steps light and almost soundless. She had become stronger in the time she'd been with them, not just physically but emotionally. There was a fire inside her now, one that burned brightly and refused to go out. "I've been thinking," Jace said, not looking at her. "We don't know when they'll come. But when they do, we need to be ready." Arya nodded. "We will be." Jace turned to face her. "I've never been a soldier. I don't know what I'm doing." Arya smiled softly. "You're doing just fine." "I'm doing my best," Jace said, his voice low. "But you don't have to keep fighting this battle alone. You've got us now. All of us." Arya looked at him, and for the first time Jace saw something like hope in her eyes. It was small, but it was there. "We'll fight together," she said. "We're a family now." That night, as they sat around the fire, Jace realized just how far they had come. A week ago they had been strangers, nothing more than people bound by a shared moment of survival. But now, they were more than that. They were a family. And they would fight for each other. The Zarkani might have come to destroy Arya, but they had no idea what they were up against. Jace Harrow and his daughters, along with Arya, were ready. And no matter what came next, they would face it together. The morning was quiet, the sky a soft orange as the sun began to rise over the plains. Jace stood outside, his eyes scanning the horizon. The ranch, which had always been a place of peace, now felt like a fortress. Every corner was guarded, every movement watched. But the tension in the air was thick, as if something was waiting to happen. Arya stood beside him, her eyes narrowed, watching the same horizon. Become stronger over the past few weeks. She moved like someone who had learned to survive, someone who had fought many battles and come out alive. She wasn't just a woman from a distant tribe anymore. She was one of them now. A protector, a fighter. She had earned her place in their family. "They're coming, aren't they?" Arya's voice was soft, but there was no doubt in her words. Jace nodded slowly. "I think it's only a matter of time." "We're ready," Arya said firmly, her eyes still focused on the distance. "We've prepared, and we've trained. We're ready for them." Jace glanced at her, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. She was right. They had worked together, each of them learning from the other. He had taught her how to use the ranch's weapons, and she had shown him how to survive in ways he had never imagined. They were a team now, and in that moment Jace knew that whatever happened, they would face it together. The wind shifted, blowing dust across the ground. Jace's heart raced, his thoughts drifting to his daughters. They were inside, preparing for the worst. He had told them to stay close, to be ready to move if needed. They were young, but they were strong, just like their mother had been. And like Arya, they had learned to fight for what they loved. "Sarah and Emma," Jace said, his voice tight with worry. "They're ready too, but I can't help but fear for them." Arya looked at him, her expression softening. "They're stronger than you think, Jace. We all are. The Zarkani don't know what they're walking into." "I hope you're right." As the day passed, the air grew heavier, the tension thick enough to feel in every breath. Jace and Arya spent the morning checking their defenses, making sure everything was in place. They worked quickly and efficiently, each of them knowing what had to be done. Sarah and Emma stayed close, their eyes wide but determined. They had done their part, helping to set traps, learning to use the rifles, and keeping watch. They were ready. By afternoon, the sun was high in the sky and the heat was unbearable. The dust that had settled earlier now stirred again, as if nature itself was preparing for the coming storm. And then, as the light began to fade, they saw it. A small group of riders appeared on the horizon, silhouetted against the setting sun. Jace's heart skipped a beat. The Zarkani. They came like shadows, their figures growing clearer as they drew closer. There were 5 of them mounted on swift, dark horses, their faces hidden behind masks. They rode with purpose, as if they knew exactly where they were going. And they did. They had come for Arya. They had come to finish what they started. Jace's grip tightened on his rifle as he glanced at Arya. "Are you ready?" She nodded, her expression hardening. "Let's do this." The Zarkani were getting closer now, their horses kicking up dust as they galloped toward the ranch. Jace and Arya exchanged one last glance before they sprang into action. They had set up a series of traps along the perimeter, carefully hidden in the tall grass. But there was no time to wait for the Zarkani to stumble into them. They had to act first. Jace fired a warning shot into the air, the sound echoing across the land. The Zarkani slowed, looking around, their eyes scanning the area. Arya, moving quickly and quietly, darted into the shadows, positioning herself behind a large rock. Jace followed, his heart pounding in his chest. The Zarkani halted. Their leader, tall with a cruel smile, spoke first. "We know you're here, Apache. You can't hide from us forever." Jace's voice rang out, steady but full of anger. "You don't belong here. Leave now, and we won't have to fight." The Zarkani leader laughed, a cold, empty sound that sent a shiver down Jace's spine.
"Fight your outnumbered, cowboy?"
"You've got nothing but a few rifles and some dirt. We've been hunting your kind for years. This is over." Arya stepped forward, her eyes locked on the leader. "It's not over until I say it is." She raised her rifle, aiming at the Zarkani leader. Jace's heart raced as the tension between them grew. The air was thick with the promise of violence, the quiet before the storm. But he trusted Arya. He knew she was ready. She had been through worse, and she had survived. The leader's smile faltered, his eyes narrowing as he realized the fight was far from over. He raised his own weapon, signaling his men to draw theirs. And then, with a cry, the battle began. The next few minutes felt like a blur. Jace and Arya fought side by side, their movements fluid and synchronized. The sound of gunfire echoed through the air as the Zarkani charged forward, but Jace and Arya were faster, more precise. Every shot they fired found its mark. Arya moved like a shadow, her rifle steady in her hands as she picked off the Zarkani one by one. Jace, his heart pounding, fought with everything he had, keeping the Zarkani at bay. He had never been in a fight like this before. But there was something in him now, something that made him stronger, braver. It was the need to protect his daughters, to protect Arya, and to protect everything they had built together. The Zarkani leader, realizing that they were losing, signaled for his men to retreat. But it was too late. The remaining Zarkani turned to flee, their horses galloping away as fast as they could. Jace and Arya didn't hesitate. They took down the last of them, ensuring they wouldn't return. When the dust settled, the ranch was quiet again. The fight was over. The Zarkani were gone. Jace stood, his rifle still in his hands, as he watched the Zarkani retreat into the distance. His heart was still racing, but he couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. They had done it. They had won. Arya stood beside him, her breath heavy, but her eyes alive with a fire that had not been there before. She had proven herself, and in doing so, she had earned her place in this family.
She was no longer a captive. She was free.
And she had a new purpose. "We did it," Jace said, his voice hoarse. Arya nodded, her gaze steady. "We did. But we're not done yet." Jace looked at her, confusion in his eyes. "What do you mean?" Arya smiled, the first true smile Jace had seen from her in weeks. "This is just the beginning, Jace. We've broken the chains that bound me, and now we're free." And for the first time, Jace understood. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were living, together.